Okay, so what we're going to be doing here is we're actually going to go into a little bit of understanding in terms of what the different modules are. And in addition, we want to understand what the linkages are in this knowledge base. Okay, so we've created a slide here that will help us in this process.
Okay, so the body of knowledge really starts out with very much a top-down planning. Top-down planning meaning we need to start out with a strategic business plan. Top management will give us that plan, and it will tell us what needs to happen, what kind of a company are we, who our customers going to be, what kind of manufacturing environment we are. All of that kind of very overview, general material needs to come from top management. Once we have that, then we can break that down into functional requirements. Functional meaning like sales and marketing, like operations, like finance, and so on. And the way we do that is we look at the master planning of resources. That'll be our first content module. So master planning of resource talks about or studies the process of sales and operations planning. And sales and operations planning starts with a plan, starts with a marketing plan, compares that to what we can do, our capacity, our operations plan, marries the two together, and makes sure that, hey, the sales plan is such that operations can actually do that. We check that out through what's called the resource plan. So the resource planning checks out to make sure that the demand and supply are pretty much in sync and it's doable. Okay? And once we've come up with that sales and operations plan, we have a company game plan that's cross-functional and that everybody can buy into, even the other functionals like HR, like engineering and product development. Once we develop that sales and operations plan, which is still pretty general, we've taken the very general strategic plan, the business plan, and broken it down a little bit into some real numbers. We started out with dollars, and now we have numbers, and we're based on families, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Once we have that plan, we have a doable plan, we have the handshake of all the various functions that says, this is what I can do, then we can break that down, or we can disaggregate that sales and operations plan into a master schedule, or the process of master scheduling. Master scheduling will then look at end items perhaps and say, this is what I specifically am going to build. Sales and operations planning said, this is what I'm going to build in general, by family and in monthly units. Master scheduling says, this is what I'm going to build by end units, sellable end units, which we call independent demand.
But let me jump in here and talk a little bit more at a higher level, because some of this terminology might be very difficult for new people or students to appreciate. So we will go more into depth in that, but let's at this stage think about a few things. We'll look at here, for example, that the modules that are going to be covered is master planning, something called detailed scheduling, and execution. Those are the three middle ones, okay?
Yes,
and we'll
correct.
come back to what the basic supply chain. And then what we do here is we look at what is involved, and so we've got the different areas, like in terms of planning, and then shop floor level execution. And then we also have tools. So this is just trying to put a diagram, a picture, in terms of the different modules and what they cover. And what you notice is that there's connections between the different areas. So you have those lines linking sales and operations planning with perhaps some tools that you're going to learn. Okay?
Right.
And also what we have is there's a sequence going from top to down. You know, so what we have is master planning resources going to something called detailed planning, and then execution and control. So there is, like, in terms of your mind focus, you need to go from up, going down, down, and that's why we tell you to take it in that order, those exams.
Right.
So what we're going to do is go in detail to the different modules a little later, and we've got some graphs for that.
Okay. Right. Let me just say what you said, and perhaps a little bit different. We have a very broad general plan. And with very broad general plan with strategic management. Top management has said, this is the kind of company we are. Then we go into sales and operations planning, saying, this is some specific numbers. We check that out with, can we actually do that? And in something called resource planning, that's the connection. From that, then we develop the master schedule, and that's more of a, this is what I'm actually going to produce. And then we'll take that and say, okay, if I'm going to produce this finished unit, let's say we're going to produce a pen, then how many bodies do I need for the pen? How much ink do I need? How much this and how much that? We determine that through detailed scheduling and planning. The tool is MRP, or Material Requirements Planning, which has been around for a very long time. And so Material Requirements Planning will tell us, okay, this is what I need when I need it. And I call it the rights, the right product, the right component at the right time in the right place. From that, then we can develop, okay, if I need this, I have to cut a schedule for it. Production activity control, execution control of operations. Okay, and we manage that through the something called input-output and some other tools, order
sequencing.
Order sequencing, yeah. Yes, thank you.
So yeah, so this gives us a little idea of how this all is coming together and some of the tools and techniques. So we'll go in more detail. Now, you might not be familiar with these terms at this stage. Some of you might be experts doing it every day, but some of you might not be. So don't be too concerned. You know, you might see these acronyms, PAC, MRP, CRP. Don't worry. We'll, you know, when you study the material, it'll just become secondhand knowledge. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the first module, the basics of supply chain management, because that's kind of an overview and there's not much detail in it. Go ahead.
Okay. The basics supply chain module, basics of supply chain management. It basically covers everything from start to finish. So we start at the highest level and we work our way down, not in any great detail at this point, but we just want to get an understanding of how things connect to one another, how demand management leads into master planning, and how master planning leads into MRP again, and so on and so on and so on. Where does inventory come into play with this, and where does purchasing and distribution and all of these things? So,
in this test, the students will not be expected to do MRP calculations or CRP calculations. Again, I'm using acronyms, material requirement planning or capacity requirement planning. You won't be expected to know those calculations. You just have to have a general idea what it's about.
Yeah, and they'll ask questions. If a company changes a manufacturing environment, for instance, let's say they were a professional, they made professional cameras for the professionals, and now Walmart has come in and said, hey, we want you to make tons of these little cameras. That's a different manufacturing environment. What needs to change? That's what we will kind of learn at a very high level with the basics of supply chain.
Okay. And then there are other things you go into. There's some purchasing, there's physical distribution.
How they fit in.
Yeah, and lean quality, and also theory of constraints, you know, bottlenecks and so on.
Right.
So, yeah, I think people might be a little unsure in terms of taking the test, in terms of how much I need to know. You know, I mean, that'd be
yes.
You get that question all the time,
Yes.
Bob.
It's a little bit of a challenge to teach, to expose the new student to enough of this so that they understand it, but not so much that they get bogged down in it.
Then the suggestion would be study all the material and take the test one after the other.
I'm not, say that again.
Okay, the idea, maybe the best way to do it is go and study for all the modules. Instead of trying to do one and then incrementally another one, I mean, go and try to study the whole material, so then you're prepared, you can hit all the modules.
I wouldn't recommend that, because if you want the three modules after the basics of supply chain management get relatively detailed.
Okay.
And you want to focus on that.
Yeah.
And then take that test, and then take the next detailed test and take it. Some students will take the basics of supply chain after the three.
Okay.
I prefer they take the basics, because then they have a clue, a better clue.
How everything is fitting together in the
Yes,
flow.
yes.
Okay, very good. So that tells us a little bit about the basics of supply chain management. Let's talk a little bit about the master planning of resources module. What are some of the main components here?
Okay, and as you can see, the master planning of resources is, the key is to balance our supply, what we can produce, with our demand, what the customer wants. Okay, so we start out looking at demand management, which is a combination of forecasting, both number crunching and what we call qualitative forecasting, which is looking at other aspects and looking at the forecast that way. We come up with that demand management and we say, this is what we think we can sell. And demand management is not just forecasting, though. It's promotions, it's looking at new product introduction, old product discontinuing, and so on, that kind of thing. But it really is trying to mold the customer's needs into the game plan specified by top management. Okay, so then we have the supply side. Then we need to say, okay, can I do that? So then we compare, and there's a technique we'll go into a little later. There's a technique that says, okay, if I'm going to supply, our demand is this, I'll look at that, I'll increase or decrease my inventory according to plan, and then I'll look at, can I do that? Do I have the capacity? So I need a load of what the demand is versus the capacity.
And I think what we can do is go in some further slides and show how it's all connected. Because again, there's this terminology that people find difficult. But you have to remember that in the heart of this is the sales and operations planning,
right.
and we'll show it. So let's take a look at this graph here. And Bob, just can you quickly go through and explain the different components. And later we can actually go and look at some subcomponents too.
Okay. So the body of knowledge, where the numbers come from, starts out with the strategic planning. That's very, very high level. Top management, long term, they're looking at, do we enter a new market? Do we go offshore? Do we build a new facility? Do we go into new product? It's very strategic. From that, we can build that business plan. Okay, and that's still top management kind of thing. Then, once we have the business plan, then we need to know, okay, what does that mean in terms of product? Okay, what does that mean in terms of what I'm going to build and how I'm going to build it? Okay, so we come up with the first detailed module is master planning of resources. Master planning of resources is first, it looks at the first breakdown of the business plan. And the first breakdown is we're looking at the family level of products. By that I mean we won't be looking at, say, a bicycle. We won't be looking at, if we make bicycles, we won't be looking at an individual bike, but we'll be looking at 10-speed bikes versus maybe with drop-down bars, racing bikes versus the road bike versus the granny bike, that kind of thing. And so we'll plan everything by families. Okay, and we're doing this in sales and operations. So that's our demand management portion. Plan the families and plan how are we going to make promotions for those families? How can we influence demand in a way that fits in with the strategic plan? Okay, so that's step one. You want me to go into detail on sales and operations?
Well, no, let's go through that a little further.
Okay.
But just try to give an overall view of the different other so what the sales and operations plan then creates a production plan.
Yes.
But also it's tied to some capacity issues.
Okay. So the capacity issue is we need to look at resource management. Okay. Resource planning, excuse me. Again, we'll come up with a demand plan. This is what I think I can sell. Then we need to look at our operations side and say, we create a load on the factory that this plan would create. And then we say, okay, here's how much I can make, or here's how much I need, excuse me, in capacity. But I only have this much, okay? And so there's a mismatch. So we need to work those two together. We can change change capacities, you know, work overtime if that's the case, or subcontract, or do all those kinds of things. That's what the module goes into, is what can I do to make that happen? Once I can get it to where they're fairly the same, you know, the demand versus our capacity to produce, demand and supply are fairly equal, then I create what's called a production plan. The production plan says this is what I plan to make at a high level, at a family level. Okay?
Okay, yeah, so let me just kind of recap on how this is going. So what we have is we are at the strategic level. We start off and we come up with what the corporate wants. We come up with a business plan, and it can be in terms of several months. Then we come up with the sales and operations planning, which is the heart. And basically it involves two components. One is what we call the demand management, which we'll look at next. What are some of the components? And looking at the capacity. And what we're trying to do is balance it.
Correct.
And we go through an iterative process. After this iterative process, we come up with a production plan, which is somewhat that we think will work.
Yes.
You know? And then that will then generate something called master schedule. Okay? So that we'll have the master schedule, and that will actually be much more detailed. That will be at the, instead of when we're talking aggregate level bikes, we know it exactly, different bikes exactly.
The sales unit.
Yeah. And then that will then feed into something called material requirement planning, which is the next module that is also involved. So this kind of provides a big picture. And then let's look at the different components.
Okay.
So let's look at the next component of what goes into the demand management at the family level.
Okay, demand management is a combination of, think of this is what sales and marketing do. They're the owners of demand management. They need to look at what orders do I already have, and then they need to forecast what they think is going to happen, because we need to forecast out over a period of time in order to get the right materials at the right place at the right time. So they will look at history for forecasting. They will look at trends, the economic trends. They'll look at all kinds of different things. We call it, they'll look at numbers, quantitative numbers, or they'll look at other kinds of input, qualitative kinds of things, to come up with a game plan. This is what we think we can sell. Okay.
So, okay, that's good. Okay, orders is, we have orders on hand, firm orders, and then we've got forecasts based on past historical data. Now, what is distribution planning? How does that come into the demand management?
Okay. Certain types of businesses, especially make to stock, usually need to take the finished inventory and put it out into the field.
So like, let's say I make pencils.
Yes.
And so pencils, you're not going to be waiting for an order. You're just going to push the system. But it has to go through different layers of the distribution.
Right.
So you have to make sure it's in the different warehouses, and from the warehouses is sent out to the different rail. Because Walmart and Target will say, I want this much quantity. And you don't have those lead times to go and actually get the lead for the pencil and the wood.
Make the stock means the stock is there.
Right. So that's part of that whole complex of this family level demand management.
Right. And we need to know not only what does the ultimate customer want, what does Walmart want and need, but when do we need to have it in the regional distribution center? When do we need to have it in the local distribution center? When do we need to have it in Walmart's distribution center?
And that's what we call
and
it.
So on.
And that there's actually mechanics to it called distribution resource planning.
Right.
Okay, so that gives us an idea of demand management. Let's go through and look at this heart of sales and operations planning. And so maybe just talk about the different modules, and I'll grab in and bring it to the ERP.
This is the most fun part from a learning, I think, and a teaching standpoint. Sales and operations planning, relatively new. I mean, it's come into play in the last 10 years or so. Sales and operations planning. Well, let me back up. We used to have the high level, the executive level decisions being made, and then we would, each function, sales and marketing, production, finance, and so on, would make a plan based on the high level decision or business plan. So they take the business plan and they each make a plan, but in the past, traditionally, they didn't talk to one another. Something that we call a functional silo. Now you can envision that as being a silo, like in agriculture, and all the information for my function is in this silo. And the next silo over there, they're making their plans, but they have no clue what we're doing in our silo. So sales and operations planning is the way to eliminate that. And this is where we begin to collaborate amongst each individual unit, each individual function. So now, we have the business plan, sales and marketing need to make the demand plan, but they can't make it in isolation anymore. They're no longer siloed. They have to have good knowledge of what manufacturing can do, what we can afford through finance, and what product development is going to do. They have to have a lot of influence and knowledge of that. So they make their plan not only based on the top level decision making, business plan, but also, is it doable? Last thing they want is to go out and sell something that can't be delivered. That would be, that would be terrible. So now, sales and operations planning, what they do, you come up with a demand plan, okay, and then they work then with the supply folks to see if we can do it. That's the process we talked about before. Here's my sales, here's my my capacity, and can I actually make the two together? Sales and operations planning is where all these functions come together and collaborate and say, this is the way I'm going to run my business for the next short to medium term.
Okay, so this gives us some idea of how it comes together. So what we're trying to talk about is an integrated organization. So we got the salespeople, we got finance, executive decision, product development, we got engineering, HR. All this comes together, and then once we got this idea of it's going to kind of work, and then we can actually, after checking with our capacity and production and making sure we got the supplies, then we can come up with an operational plan. And that production plan is critical because now we say we got something that we can work on.
Right.
And many companies actually now use ERP systems,
right.
enterprise resource. That's a way to kind of put all these things. In fact, one of the critical modules of ERP, or the heart, in many cases, is the manufacturing and the production, MRP part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then we do tie that in with the CRM, customer relationship management. So those are different components. But if you want to think of it, the sales and operations plan is the heart that brings it all together. This is where the conflicts will arise. This is where the negotiations will happen. This is where the cross silo occurs.
Yeah, it's a monthly process, and like you just said, that's the give and take happens there. And management gets involved because if the functions can't agree, then management has to come in and
have
make
the
some
leadership
choices.
role.
Right.
Okay, very good.
This is what this is the handshake of the company. This is the way. Basically, each function says, this is what I promise to do. I will sell this mix. Operations says, I will make this kind of production to the best of my abilities. Okay, now we know demand management can't dictate exactly what the customer is going to buy. We know there's going to be some problems in manufacturing. We know that the product introduction may not happen exactly as planned. So it's not set in concrete, but it is a plan, and we measure that, and we make sure that we have tolerances, and when a tolerance is broken, we all get back together and say, okay, this didn't work, this isn't working, what do we do about that?
Okay, so this gives us some idea of this particular module and the heart of it. Okay?
Right.
So let's go through and now see a little bit more in terms of how these different components add. So we talked about, coming at, in terms of master planning of resources and different modules. But we want to now talk about the role of a little bit about available to promise, talk a little bit about master production schedule, and how it ties into MRP, because that will then link to the detailed scheduling and planning.
Right.
So if you can just do a kind of a little connections between them, that would be great.
Okay, we created, in the module we just finished talking about, we created this production plan. And it said, I will build this product, or this family at least, in this quantity on a monthly basis. Now we need to take that, and that information feeds into the master scheduling process. So the master scheduling process is saying, I'm going to break down into detail end items of what we need, what what we're going to produce and when. So demand management still plays a part, because now we need to know, above, when we were looking at sales and operations planning, we were looking at families. Now we're going to be looking at end items. So we need to take the forecast that we had for the family, break that down into what specific items does that matter. So before we were talking about 10-speed bikes, now we're talking about a particular sellable unit, a bicycle. And so there's ways to break that down, and we go through that in the process. Master scheduling then will create a weekly master schedule of the individual bikes. Now, we'll still keep, for the month, the bikes will be the same quantity, but they'll be broken down individually week by week. We'll check that with our rough cut capacity planning, if I can get there. Here we go. With rough cut capacity planning, which again takes a look at what are my critical resources that I need to produce to make this plan, and do I have the capacity? And we'll adjust the capacity up or down, or maybe move maybe instead of producing the really complicated bike in week 3, we'll produce it steady Eddie all through the month. So we can change the plan accordingly. Now, you mentioned available promise. The production plan and master scheduling are really an operations controlled tool in order to plan exactly what to produce and when to produce it. Sales, though, still has a significant role in the master scheduling and what we call available to promise. And there's techniques to do that. We won't get into that, but basically it will say at any particular point in time throughout the planning horizon, we promise to produce, they promise to sell, such that we will have X amount of units available for sales to promise. Now, this is what every production planner would love their sales force to have, is to be able to go out, be talking one-on-one with the customer, and the customer says, I would like to have this bike in this quantity at this time, and the sales person can look at their PDA, whatever, and say, you can have it, and with confidence. Or no, we can't do that. Here, let's work this out. What can we do? So that's what available promise does for us.
So what we have here, just so I'm now trying to capture that. Okay, so we have information at the aggregate level. And by families, say we're talking about pens. And we can have 100 pens of this and another 100, but we don't know the specifics. So what we do is we come down and we have to make decisions at the specifics. And the specifics, and we look at our capacity. And in fact, we might have excess capacity.
Yes.
And then that allows us to come and say, okay, we have our firm orders, but we got some extra room. And we can communicate that to our salespeople and say, hey, if you can make those sales, that would be great. So that's the available to promise. Am I getting that right? I mean, it's a little more complicated.
Yes.
You look at how much inventory there is, how much is coming in, but that is how much there's extra that the marketing can sell.
Right. So the orders will come in and consume the forecast and consume the inventory.
Yeah.
And there will be extra inventory left over, and that's available to promise.
Good. Okay. So once we've done that, then we got this master schedule, and then this is a process. It's an iterative process. It's not just it shouldn't be thought just like one step.
Yes.
And then once we have something that we can commit, so we have a schedule that I think they use some terminology like freezing schedule. Once they got, maybe I shouldn't go into those terminology. Once they've got a commitment, then they actually got a master production schedule.
Correct.
Okay? And master production schedule is going to tell us what particular end items to produce.
It can get complicated, but let's leave it at that.
Okay.
Yes.
So what we have to produce, let's put it at that,
yes.
at a detailed level.
Yes.
And then that actually feeds the materials requirement planning that we're going to cover next.
Right.